Hello day, my name is Ashley Castro and I will be presenting on how the increases of temperature has an effect on an organism, specifically fish. Being a biologist on Guam, we see the negative effects of rising temperature right here in our backyard amidst the Pacific Ocean. So I thought this would be interesting to present on since we are all from Guam. A quick overview, I will be going over the importance of oxygen supply and thermal tolerance, thermal plasticity, and the effects of climate change on fish physiology. So marine ecosystems face an ongoing issue with human-induced climate change. The rising of sea temperatures thus initiate warming periods that seem to be associated with distributional shifts of organisms such as fish, for example. We can also see how it impacts their cellular metabolism, their behavior, and their sensory systems. And it can also have an effect on their growth rates. As Pacific Islanders, we should consider this important because we heavily rely on our local fish populations as a food resource. In a recent 2013 study, they predicted that over 2,000 fish species would decrease 24% in size by 2050. And this would have negative implications for food webs and possibly cause an imbalancing of ecosystems. And this will potentially have negative effects on our food security, our fisheries, and our livelihoods. Moving on. Ocean warming and acidification do have direct effects on fish physiological performance and fitness. August Crow studied the relationship between temperature and respiratory exchange in fish, in goldfish to be specific, and he noticed that cellular ATP turnover rates do increase with temperature as well. To understand this, I will be describing the oxygen consumption in fish. So, excuse me, oxygen does play an important role in the survival of marine species. Essentially, a fish would need to make adjustments to their respiratory system. As we see in this diagram, you can see an increase of gill ventilation, an increased diffusion of oxygen from surrounding water into the bloodstream, also an increased cardiac output to increase the circulatory convection of oxygen. And lastly, we can see the tissue oxygen extraction diffusing into the mitochondria, which thus which is then used for ATP regeneration. To understand the importance of oxygen supply and thermal tolerance, we all understand that the heart needs to work harder the warmer temperatures get. So fish essentially have this intrinsic pacemaker rhythm, which is then modulated by temperature. If not properly modulated by temperature, it would result in negative effects such as DNA, RNA, and protein damages, also genetic mutations and chromosome instability. Now, how fish overcome this physiological challenge is observed through thermal plasticity, which is, in other words, the way they respond to their constraints on various temperatures. So we see two ways. It is, one is thermal acclimation and one is adaptation. Through thermal acclimation, a fish can respond to temperature variability by altering their critical thermal units, critical thermal limits in order to cope with climate change. So the fish can essentially alter their cellular systems and their physiological systems at a phenotypic level. But once the stress is eradicated or removed, then the responses will decay. So it's not a permanent change, it's essentially a reversible change. In contrast, we have adaptation. If the stressor does not remove itself from the population, from the environment, then it'll result into adaptation in order for the organism to survive in its changing environment. Moving on, we will talk about the elevated temperature and escape response. So fish escape responses consist of two muscular contractions. We can see here it's in this simulation, it's showing the C-flexion that we all learned about, which is controlled by giant neurons located in the hindbrain of most fish, the Mothner cells. So when temperature increases and ocean acidification and hypoxia increases, it induces negative effects, which also cause a decrease in the fish's sense of directionality, responsiveness, and locomotor performances. This happens through between excitatory and inhibitory synaptic transmission balances. So what's happening here is directionality will be skewed and swimming away may be impaired. It would not be showing this behavior in the simulation. It is assumed that the decreased directionality would be due to higher conduction velocity from increased temperatures, which has an effect on temporal separation and inputs to the Mothner cells, which then causes a left and right confusion. So that was regarding prey responses, but as for predator, increased temperature would result in increased metabolic rates, and thus this will cause increased hunger. So we can see here that elevated temperatures do affect prey and predator behavior, and this is how we can see the imbalancing of ecosystems occur. To link this to oxygen as well, hypoxia can inhibit or it can limit the fish recovery rate when they do anaerobic activity. Therefore, their potential to engage in repetitive behavior can be altered as well. In this slide, we can see how temperature can also alter body size. In a recent study, we see that bigger fish in elevated temperature actually increase in size and smaller fish decrease in size. So we see the blue trevally here actually gets bigger, and then the small blue-green chromis gets smaller. So we can also see how elevated temperature affects body size and how an ecosystem can result in a downfall. Essentially, the smaller organisms would be more preyed upon, and it just results in an imbalanced ecosystem. In future studies, we have other factors to consider. All organisms have a different buffering thermal stress, probably better than others. We should also consider metabolic differences and temperature tolerances, and also growth rates. I'm running out of time, but I hope you guys understood this topic. And if you have any questions, you can ask me and I'll do my best to answer. Thank you guys for your time and have a good day.